Hi, everyone. Karen Roby here for Tech Republic. Today, I'm glad to be joined by Dr. Karen Panetta. Dr. Panetta is an IEEE Fellow. She's also the Dean for Graduate Education at the School of Engineering for Tufts University. And Dr. Panetta, the last time we talked, it was about a study. You've done a follow-up study regarding parents and with children under the age of 10, how they feel about care for their children involving robots and things like that in a healthcare setting. Interesting now that this global study that you guys have done is post-COVID, or I should say, as we're in the middle of COVID. What stood out to you here? Give us some of the highlights.
The first thing is this study is looking at parents with children under age of 10. And we've done this study before COVID, and now we're seeing profound changes after COVID. So there used to be so much resistance to robots and AI and trust, and we're seeing a huge shift. The US is still lagging, but we're seeing a huge shift. So for instance, robot surgery in most countries, there's a strong correlation. The parents are, okay with it. But here in the US, there's still reservations, which I still find interesting since most of that type of surgery is developed and that technology is developed in the US. So that's one finding. But in general, about 60% of all the parents were okay with it. They said, yeah, that's something that I would consider. The other big one that's kind of interesting, and I think this is more not related to COVID, but more related to acceptances of technology as they're being deployed, is artificial hearts or 3D printed organs. And parents are beginning to be accepting of that because I think they understand that if you have a life or death situation where there is no organ available, these are going to become viable options in the future. So we're seeing strong resonance with parents to allow that as well.
Yeah, Karen, it's so interesting to see how, as we've moved through this last 9 months, really since February or March, how our thoughts have changed and our feelings towards things have changed. In some cases, quite drastically. And this specifically, we're seeing it with parents and how they feel about, certain care for their children.
One of the other ones that came out of this that is heartbreaking is the number of people that aren't allowed to see their loved ones in hospitals with COVID. And I think that before to say, doing virtual AI visits or being able to have, interactive types of sessions, any types of things like that, everybody prefers in person, but now that you have no option and you can't go in, and as a parent, that terrifies me to think that I wouldn't be able to physically be with my child. So even AI powered virtual nurses, people are becoming more comfortable with that. And I think more so, not because they wouldn't be able to be near the child, but more so because they're now worried that the communications of the disease, as one caretaker goes from patient to patient, I think they feel they're safer with virtual nurses in the room doing the monitoring than a physical human being. So that was kind of an interesting study. And about 54% of our respondents said they'd be comfortable with that.
Wow, who would have thought it, Karen? Really, it's just fascinating. And switching gears here, if we talk a little bit about another big facet of this study involving disinfecting and social distancing here, people have very strong feelings on this as well.
So we talked about this last time. We said, how in China, they were okay with robots and they already had them deployed. And here in the US, there was, concern about it. But again, now with the COVID and the pandemic, everybody's like, I'd feel better with a robot in there because at least they probably have consistent coverage and you have better monitoring and you're not jeopardizing healthcare workers or the people that actually have to do that cleaning. So that's another one that we were actually surprised. So 9 out of 10 said they have a lot of trust in robots to do that. And I think that we're going to see that's going to actually influence new robotic economies. We're going to see a lot more commercial robots being deployed, which is great for the economy, but also, going to help mitigate future risks like this.
All right, and Dr. Panetta, before we let you go, I know, of course, AI is truly in your field of study, what you're focused on. How do you see, or do you see that AI in general will be fast-tracked, all of these projects as a result of this pandemic?
It actually is going to be fast-tracked. I mean, it's very popular, and We're using it a lot more for understanding how disease propagates, for understanding how human behavior is, so that we can come up with interventions to make us safer and healthier. So we're using it from our study. We used a lot of it for social distancing and to see how people were comfortable with it. Now that's a huge mind shift, because remember last time we talked, it was like, I don't want Big Brother watching me and that type of thing. But because it's, well, what are you willing to sacrifice to have your life safe and your loved ones safe? And people feel comfortable now moving towards that. There are some great concerns though with AI, because we still have issues with explainability. You don't want to, everybody thinks it's this magic box, you stick data in and it's going to give you an answer. It's only as good as the data you put in. So if you train this model and it can have bias, it can be wrong. And if people on the other end are just going to blindly accept the outcomes, that's a problem. So that's why we really have huge inroads to make with education for AI for everyone, not just those of us developing it.
All right. Dr. Karen Panetta, thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate all of you watching as well. For much more on that study and what you need to know, make sure you check out Tech Republic.